there's a reason why Paul Ryan is saying these things. There's a reason why Mitch McConnell has nothing to say about this, because in many respects, this is sort of a perfect opportunity for them to do things. And what is becoming clear is, the notion of security and of foreign policy for, as Republican issues are meaningless when compared to the idea of tax cuts. And I mean,
Yep.
honestly, like this is, we are seeing
And
the Republican
tax
Party
cuts,
in its most naked form. And
but I'd also add power to that.
I mean, I think, look,
which is they don't want to risk losing power, and they worry about like the 1974 Watergate election. They think, where they lost huge numbers of seats, they think they can protect the line. A lot of that's about serving their paymasters, but it's not all about that. Only because someone like Mitch McConnell, who's well into his 70s and married into wealth, quite, and is now worth something like $40 million. He doesn't need to please anybody anymore or do that. He likes the power. He likes being there and rooting people's lives. Apparently, he gets off on that.
And I think there's an ideological, these tax cuts are not just about putting more money in their pockets. There's an ideological belief that you don't want certain types of people to be in any way helped by government, and you don't want government to help people. That's just not the role of government. I mean, this is fundamental ideological disagreement here and perspective. And now, we heard Mitch McConnell has figured out that after watching what took place in the House, that the best way for him to get health care passed through the Senate is to be very, very quiet about it. And, to a certain extent, when we heard, and I was, really skeptical about it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 1 week ago, when you're hearing like, it's dead on arrival in the Senate, we're not going to get anything done, we're not close to 50, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that they're starting to get ready to score this with a CBO, and that they have pushed this through, and they're still working things out with the parliamentarian. We can get to that in a second. But it's quite clear that they have the broad outlines of a healthcare bill that they are prepared to pass. And
I don't know. I don't know exactly. The thing that I always felt like was that they would never get away with was the pre-existing condition elimination, and I still think they won't get away with that. But it doesn't help people who are poor and need need Medicaid. And what they are trying to do is cut those federal matching funds that were part of Obamacare, and now they're trying to turn that into a 7-year horizon where it's kind of like the frog boiling in the pot. Their hope is that nobody notices if they're suddenly losing it little by little.
Yep.
Fewer people will notice. And so far, it seems like you're right. People like Dean Heller and the state I sit in here, Rob Portman, who tries to play the role of a moderate-ish guy when he can, and Shelley Moore Capito, who was from West Virginia, where huge numbers of people are going to be hurt by this. They seem like they're opening up to it. So it's true, it won't be as bad as the House bill. People who will, with pre-existing conditions, will not end up being hurt to the level that the House bill wanted to. But again, that doesn't help you if you're low income.
Oh, yeah.
Medicaid's whatever.
And look, we know that what comes out of the Senate is one end of basically the playing field where the final bill is going to land, and so I'm quite convinced that the idea was just get to conference and hammer something out, and then we just go back and say, like, this is for all the whatever, the marbles, folks. This is the way that we get tax cuts. If we don't pass this, we will pass nothing. And you will, a year from now, have to face your constituents with having passed zero legislation.
That's the judgment. That's the one I think that Mitch McConnell has made, which is they can't face people in the midterms having passed nothing. That something has to pass, and it has to be something that at least looks on the surface acceptable. That's the part where I think they're going to fail, because I just don't think there's anything they can put together that will look acceptable. Even so, I think if they pass it, I still think they're in a lot of trouble. But, you know,
I agree.
their thought is, again, and we've seen some of this happen already, for a while now, their thought is if we can combine taking it to our propaganda outlets, taking it straight to Fox and Breitbart and Rush Limbaugh and the rest, having them push it onto the mainstream media and affect their narrative, so we can, and the mainstream media will keep doing their he said, she said crap and not actually cover stuff honestly. We step into that void with our media, and then we can, then on the other end of the deal, we can suppress enough votes in places where we control everything, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, whatever, that we can hold on to the House.
Yep.
And Sinclair can take over however many more stations and infect however many more minds with our lies and garbage. That's the game they're playing here. This thing has approval rating of like dog poop.
And they look, this is what they know. Yeah. They know that if they can pass permanent tax reform, in other words, taxes cuts that do not sunset 10 years out, which is the only thing they can do to get by the Byrd rule, and that it will be that much harder down, or they contemplate that it's going to be that much harder down the road, and politically it's going to be a political weapon if there is a need to raise or desire or an attempt to raise taxes going forward. And so I think for them, this is the Holy Grail. And they can't do the second round of tax cuts unless they do this one first in any meaningful way. They can't do that second round. And I think that's so whatever he can cobble together to get into that conference, they know that when it's the last bite at the apple that people are going to have to vote for it. And there may be a couple of senators, but, none of them, Susan Collins, somehow she's maintained this reputation as being some type of moderate who always votes with the most conservative elements of her party. And
who was it who overheard, Rick Santorum sitting on on the Amtrak line? It was somebody who's like a reporter. I don't really feel like it was Josh Marshall, but somebody did, and tweeted out that basically what Santorum was saying, I'm sure people can Google this and find this, was on his phone and was like, oh, don't worry, whenever we need her, Susan Collins is there. That's the story of Susan Collins. You need to vote for an extremist lunatic like Gorsuch, she'll be there.
Yep.
Or something like this. What she'll do is she'll break with you on all the non-important votes. She sits there and calibrates exactly where she can break with the Republican Party, still make sure they get done what they want to get done, and then can walk around portraying herself as a moderate. And look, I think there's some point in this that you're saying, which is if they can make this a permanent tax cut, all these guys, most of them are millionaires already, but I'm sure just greedy as all hell, and there's never enough money you can have. They can leave Congress whenever they want and probably choose which investment bank to work at for an overinflated salary for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just from an ideological standpoint, and in terms of maintaining their jobs, they're still going to get hung with all this. And they're just thinking at least we will deliver tax cuts. And
that's right.
And so
forget lobbying at this point. They've had a better trail blazed by the Phil Grahams now and Eric Cantors, and on the Democratic side, Harold Ford. Why make $500,000 or $750,000 or even $1 million as a lobbyist when you can, if you cut taxes enough for the people at the top who are at investment banks, you can go straight to those banks and land yourself a $2 million gig.
Right. And we should just tell people, I went over what we know of this bill at this point yesterday, at the end of yesterday's free show, so people can check that out. But there's one point that came up yesterday that is going to be interesting to see how they get around this. Apparently, the parliamentarian, a woman named Elizabeth McDonough, has flagged language that would bar people from using the refundable tax credits for insurance. This is how they're going to provide subsidies. Instead of direct subsidies, they're going to do refundable tax credits. And you cannot spend that money on insurance plans, or you cannot receive that refundable tax credit if you have an insurance plan that covers abortion. And this is basically Hyde Amendment type language.
Uh-huh.
And
well, isn't it the law in New York also that everyone has to include abortion?
Well, you will not be able to get federal subsidies in that instance.
That's right.
But
Which
the
is
problem
everybody.
is that the Byrd rule is basically a 6-part rule. One of those rules is that you cannot have everything in the bill must be primarily oriented towards affecting the budget as opposed to making policy. And the subsidies, essentially, the refundable tax credits being rescinded because your insurance has abortion as a benefit is not about the budget, the U.S. budget. It's about trying to discourage people from having or prevent people from having abortions. And
right.
that
so
is
then we can have more kids and they can take away their welfare benefits so more people can suffer.
Indeed. And that is
a great plan.
That's a violation of the Byrd rule. And so they have got to figure out a way around that because they can't take that language out as it is and still attract the vast majority of Republicans in the Senate because they are, like you say, don't want women to have autonomy over their body. One of the ideas may be to change it to assistance to people who would be eligible for these subsidies, change it from a refundable tax credit and filter the subsidy through some other program where people might be getting support that already has a Hyde Amendment involved in it. So I don't know. I think they're going to be able to get around that, but people should just be aware that that's going to be a story for a day or two, that they may have a Byrd rule problem. But the bottom line is people need to call their senators, and you need to tell your friends to call their senators. The general number is 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. And if you live in like Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, like you mentioned, Cliff, Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia, Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Bob Corker, Tom Cotton, Jeff Flake, Cory Gardner, Lindsey Graham, Dean Heller, Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman. These are all targets in terms of people who might be hesitant to vote for this bill. Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos